New Delhi as the moderator. The speakers would be Mr. Anindya Chaudhary, Country Manager, Shell India Markets Private Limited, Mr. Taro Yanagidate, Vice President, Diamond Gas International Private Limited, Mitsubishi Corporation, and Mr. Muhammed Aziz Khan, Chairman, Summit Group, Bangladesh. Thank you to all the panelists and moderator. May I please ask Mr. Parikh to take over the session?
Thank you very much. I think the Indo-Pacific region is one which, by and large, is short of energy. It's getting LNG or imported from various sources. And there are, I think, a number of opportunities for having creating a common market, because then you can exploit a large number of possible economies of scale and so on. In order to do that, however, we need a certain degree of understanding among all the countries. One has to recognize that, yes, there are huge economies of scale in having an LNG terminal, but then where should that be located? What's the best way of going around it? And how should that common terminal, in a sense, be operated, and how we can have a market mechanism which the ultimate goal should be to provide LNG to all parts of this region at the lowest possible cost. And that should be the objective of this. And without taking much time, I will invite the panelists, and then we will see how the discussion proceeds. So may I first call upon Sri Anindya Chaudhary, Country Manager, Shell India Markets Private Limited.
Thank you, sir. Many thanks to the organizers for having invited Shell here. We are delighted to participate. Shell has a long history of LNG development, especially in what's now called the Indo-Pacific region. I mean, this is the region which actually is the cornerstone of LNG markets historically. 50 years there's been LNG markets that have been there in this region, starting from exports from Brunei and Malaysia to Japan, Korea, then going on from projects in the from the Middle East, again to Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and then other countries have joined the markets. Other countries have joined production, Australia. So it's a very interesting marketplace anyway, and conventionally we have found that the pricing benchmarks have often been established by this market. So already there is a good market, but I think the spread of LNG into this market, I think, can do much more. And of late we have seen new markets open up. Pakistan, Bangladesh, and there are various other solutions. We can talk about it. I sort of, when I sort of read the title of the session, I had understood more focus on South Asia, and if you look at the South Asian perspective, there have been talks of gas. I mean, LNG is just a way to transport gas, which is not easy to be transported easily. I mean, if you have gas in the country or gas in the neighborhood, you can pipe it. But when gas is several thousand miles away, then LNG makes it a way to transport gas. So essentially, we're not talking about LNG as a product, but we are looking at gas as a product, the commodity. So in India, if I recall, I mean, there have been many projects that we have talked about through gas pipeline connectivity across the region. So I remember way back in the early 90s, there was talk about Oman-India gas pipeline. Then we had talk about Bangladesh exporting gas into India through pipelines. We had talks of Myanmar gas coming in through pipeline or through compressed natural gas solutions. And of course, we all know the Iran-India Pakistan pipeline and then now the Tapi pipeline. There still is another proposal, I think, on the table to get gas from Qatar via a gas pipeline. But I mean, the short story to everything is that these pipelines are extremely difficult to get built. However sensible it is, you often find an LNG solution that actually gives you more security of supply, and therefore, it is being a popular solution. If you look at the Middle East again, there are smaller markets, but the markets are not too far away from gas sources. But there again, people are setting up LNG terminals and actually choosing to receive gas as LNG. So there's this big benefit in having an LNG terminal. Of course, in the case of island nations in this Indo-Pacific region, I think LNG makes an obvious choice to replace liquid fuels like diesel. You could have hub and spoke arrangements which can provide solutions. Even in the South Asian context, if Sri Lanka doesn't have sufficient demand for an LNG terminal, it could actually be an arrangement that can be made through any of the Indian terminals. Similarly, you could get LNG up to Maldives or to Andamans, easily. So I think those solutions can easily be worked on. I think the bigger question is that, do governments, do customers show a preference to use gas or not? I mean, that drives the whole decision whether an LNG terminal gets built, because at the end of the day, because of the nature of the supply chain, there's cryogenics involved, there's cryogenic shipping involved, and there is it adds a bit of cost. So you need some scale to make it all viable. So I see the future of gas quite interesting in all these countries. And one of the reasons is it's not only clean from a air quality point of view, but also it benefits the carbon footprint of nations. And right now, we have all seen the IPCC 1.5 report come out. I think countries will increasingly feel the need to decarbonize. Whatever the current positions may be, but coming up to the next 2 rounds of the NDC mechanism, you'll find there'll be a lot more pressure, and then gas will then be considered quite useful, because unless you're able to price in the externalities, it might be difficult for gas to compete. In fact, gas does not get its right sort of credit in this marketplace, but we think it's going to change in the coming decade or so. Of course, I mean, a lot of people will say, we're going to get renewable energies. I currently work in the area of energy transition, so I'm told every day that we should get rid of all the fossil fuels and we should just move into renewables. But the reality is not going to be a switch on and off type of decision. Even with massive renewables entering the electricity markets, we have seen in certain countries, Australia, for example, there were difficulties in so much of renewables being absorbed in the grid. So how do you deal with that intermittency, those sort of issues? And gas is perfectly suited to do it. So as more renewable actually enters the grid, we expect more gas will be actually absorbed by the sector. And then it's as I said, it's a government decision at the end of the day. And we suddenly, if you look at the case of China, where the Chinese government decided that enough was enough and they need to clean up the air and get the blue skies back. We see a lot of gas going into China and a lot of LNG going into China. Of course, China doesn't only buy LNG, they also get gas via pipelines. So I think that's an example that is there for people to follow, and as we sit in the smog in Delhi, and there are, I think, learnings for us as well. How can the government assist with all this? I mean, it's essentially a government decision at the end of the day, without getting into too deep into the challenges of the market. But I think basically, gas consumers must have the ability to buy gas, and that means they must have the infrastructure available to buy gas from. And in countries, that's a challenge. In India, that's a challenge. We don't have enough gas pipeline networks. So the government has to provide an enabling, supporting framework. In our neighboring countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh, because they had the benefit of certain amount of domestic gas, so they had the pipeline system network is already there. So it's much easier for them to bolt on the LNG. For us, it's a little bit more difficult. Some states in India are more progressive than the others, but I think that's an important thing. The other bit I'd like to talk about is not sufficient to have just the infrastructure, but you got to have supporting markets to go with it. But that's how you actually get competitive forces to work. and the customer can benefit from that competition to get, as Dr. Parikh said, the best price. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, before we raise some questions, maybe we hear all the speakers first. And may I now request Mr. Taro Yanagidate? Yes. Is that correctly pronounced?
Yes.
Yanagidate. Yeah, he is the Vice President, Diamond Gas International Private Limited, Mitsubishi Corporation. Mr. Yanagidate.
Thank you. So my name is Taro Yanagidate, and I am from Diamond Gas International, which is a subsidiary of LNG Marketing subsidiary of Mitsubishi Corporation. So using a few minutes, probably I will start with a brief introduction of who we are and what we do. First of all, Mitsubishi Corporation, as you may have heard, we are trading and investment conglomerate, and we have very diversified business models, and the energy industry is one of them. And in the LNG sector, we have participated. We have started dealing with LNG in 1969 with Alaska, as actually as an importing agent to Japan, and then we have participated into Brunei LNG project with Shell. And the first delivery was made in 1972. And thereafter, we have also participated in Malaysia in '83, also with Shell. And Australia, '89, and Oman, 2000, and so forth. And now, since this is organized by the U.S. Embassy, I will briefly touch upon our activities in the production side in U.S. We have made a final investment decision in Cameron LNG plant, which is located in the Louisiana, in 2014 summer. And the plant is under construction, and it is expected to start production early next year, 2019. And the plant will produce 12 million tons of LNG, and Mitsubishi has a tolling capacity of 4 million tons to market. And this is handled by DGI. Yeah, so DGI is the Mitsubishi's sole LNG subsidiary who focuses on LNG marketing, and also short-term LNG spot trading, and also LNG shipping, and then market developments. So for market developments, because our parent company being Mitsubishi, who has a diversified business model, we do provide so-called value chain service to the emerging countries, which includes not only LNG supply, but also infrastructure investment, and in some cases also in the power developments. And again, coincidentally, Mr. Aziz Khan, who's sitting on my left side, is our partner in Bangladesh. Mitsubishi had participated into the Summit FSRU terminal recently. We are co-investors. Summit has 75%, and Mitsubishi has 25% of the FSRU terminal, which is expected to start operating early next year. So now we are together working on the gas to power developments in Bangladesh. So that's it for a brief introduction from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. May I now request Muhammed Aziz from Bangladesh?
Thank you very much. Congratulations to the organizers. Congratulations for the gift of the United States of America that I saw is written on it, and Katz and all the other organizers. Thank you very much. It's a very timely conference. The whole world is seeing at how to decarbonize. And in that decarbonization, the Indian subcontinent perhaps requires LNG the most, or natural gas the most, in order to decarbonize. The entire subcontinent is also moving ahead, even under the very difficult, onerous conditions of trade barriers, trade wars, so-called trade wars, high interest rates going up, dollar appreciating all over the world. Even under these strenuous circumstances, we have seen the Indian economy, Bangladesh economy, and even Pakistan economy growing at a 7 to 8% GDP growth, which is phenomenal and shows the resilience of these economies and the requirement of energy as a whole. Summit is participating in this for a long time, from 1998 to be precise. We are generating electricity in Bangladesh. We currently generate about 2,000 megawatts of electricity, all thermal, and we are also in the process of implementing a 600 megawatt project, and another 2,400 megawatts of project is under development. We also developed the country's second floating storage and regasification unit, FSRU, in cooperation with Mitsubishi Corporation, and initially with GE Corporation, which would come into operation hopefully by April 2019. We have other plans for the LNG. Countries like Bangladesh and India have achieved this extraordinary growth under these strenuous circumstances because we took up free market economy. We took up a borderless economy. We took up thought processes, philosophies of the United States of America, Declaration of Independence, Magna Carta of the Europe, of England. We have seen NAFTA, we have seen European Union, we formed SAARC. The democracy and free market economy, which is going hand in hand in Bangladesh and in India, India being the world's largest democracy. These are fruits of thoughts and philosophies of the West. So I do hope that we will continue to see that trades are not barriered by any country, including the United States of America. I would like to see or believe, with that belief only we can go in the front, that there won't be Brexits, there won't be trade wars, there won't be other barriers to trade. Then only there would be regional connectivity. Bangladesh and India sits at a very important place. The entire east coast of India, or the east coast of the Bay of Bengal and the east coast, is fully connected, starting from Bangladesh's Chattogram, earlier known as Chittagong port, down to Tuticorin, almost of Sri Lanka. This entire coast has often been thought of as a single physical, geographical unit. And I come here to submit that that is what that integration should happen. If you see the Gas Authority of India Limited's gas pipeline Desire, you will see that the entire east coast has a pipeline. If you see Bangladesh, as my friend from the Shell has mentioned, that Bangladesh has an existing gas portfolio where they produce 2,700 million cubic feet of gas per day. And they're in the process they have already started importing, which is a huge initiative from Bangladesh's side. The first FSRU is already in place from the United States, US company Accelerate, and they are currently pumping 400 MMCFD of gas while we are talking into the national grid. So we see this Bangladesh being a champion, and we require it with 55,000 square mile and 160 million people. Nobody understands the pain of carbon more perhaps than Bangladesh. We don't feel it, we don't listen to it, we can actually physically see it. The aggression of the sea is on Bangladesh. It is the people of Bangladesh that dies, it is the floods that come to Bangladesh. And so it is not a matter of rhetorics or not a matter of philosophy that climate change should be stopped and decarbonization should happen, the 2% growth. All these things harm Bangladesh. I can physically see it. I can see that my villages are being eroded, being taken away by the aggression of the sea. I see the farmland going away. I see the relatives losing their houses. So decarbonization is one of the key factors for which we should move into LNG. And I am a strong believer that Bangladesh is taking the right step in continuing to move towards LNG more perhaps than towards coal. On the other hand, economically also this supports very much for the entire East Coast, simply because the entire East Coast has about 600 million people, and if you take as a coast, that is one of the most, perhaps the most densely populated area in the whole world. And there is very little possibility of sun. The irradiation in the entire space is less. The wind is also less. So the wind and sun energy that we talk about are difficult with the number of people that we have over there and the lack of irradiation and wind that we have over there. Coal, as a matter of fact, is also takes up a lot of space for takes up a lot of capital for infrastructure itself, for import of coal. So our choice economically is also that of natural gas. Fortunately, Bangladesh has grown a good gas grid, and while Indian East Coast has not grown a good gas grid, but it can easily do that. And I do believe that Bangladesh has huge opportunity in taking advantage of this, and if the Indian government and the people of India supports this, the entire East Coast from Chattogram down to the southernmost part of India can be connected under one international gas grid. I'm looking forward to that day, and I hope this conference would support towards that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rai. I think the speakers have raised a number of issues, and I think let me add some more to this. One of the things is that certainly trade, cross-border energy trade can be very beneficial to different countries. We have at IRADE carried out under the support, with the financial support of USAID, studies in saying what will the benefit of electricity trade between India and Nepal, India and Bangladesh, India and Bhutan, and all the countries together. And we find that this would be enormously beneficial to all the countries. For example, in Nepal, they cannot develop their hydro potential unless they have a market. And it's only a combined region then can provide the market that can make them develop their one major resource, hydro, and with that, their economy can grow significantly faster. In fact, our simulations show that by 2045, their GDP can be 40% higher, and per capita consumption correspondingly higher. So I think it is really beneficial to all the participants. As I said, when trade willingly taken care of at mutually agreed price and terms, it benefits everyone. Now the question, if you're looking at gas, and I would say instead of LNG, we should talk about gas trade, which is a real good point made by Mr. Chowdhury. And here are some of the issues that we should consider. Whereas cross-border pipelines have been difficult to make, countries would have to build their own domestic gas pipelines. For example, if India wants to have city gas grids in 300 cities, and if you want to provide clean cooking fuel to villages with LNG, we need to have a gas grid. Similarly, I think if Bangladesh wants to use gas more efficiently, it could also would like to have a gas grid, because providing LNG to remote villages and every household, every week or every month, requires a huge logistics and distribution cost, including fuel costs. So if you want to minimize carbon footprint, you need to think about what is a larger interest, a more economically sensible way of doing this. So if we assume that Bangladesh has a gas grid, this connects all its cities or major towns, India has one, then the question comes, should we have a common LNG importing terminal and just a pipeline that connects one gas grid to the other, or should we really think in terms of LNG transport from one place to the other? And I think this is certainly, once you add a third country like Myanmar with its gas potential, then these issues become certainly quite interesting, and one wants to examine them in some details. But the second point I think I would like to make is that gas is expensive compared to other fuels, and how do we make it more economical in a sense? One of the ways is, of course, the combined heat and power kind of use of gas makes its utilization efficiency almost upward of 80%, in which case gas becomes a competing fuel. But to do that, to ask a small factory or a cluster of factories or a cluster of plants to go for a CHP requires that they should have an assured supply of gas. So gas pipeline, which provides gas round the clock, becomes very important element for them as well. So I would say that we should really not write off gas pipelines as an important thing. Now, the second question comes, LNG is certainly an extremely clean fuel for cooking. And we know that indoor air pollution has done enormous damage in South Asian countries where people are using biofuels. Now, question some people raise is that if you are substituting biofuels by petroleum product like LNG, are you putting more GHG in the atmosphere? And the answer to that is no. Actually, burning fuel wood puts more GHGs in the atmosphere than burning LNG. I may refer to the report of the expert committee that I chair on low carbon strategy for inclusive growth for the details of this calculation. But I would say that we have to think about this. Now, if we are going to supply gas, as I said, LNG to all the people in villages, then alternatives should also be considered. Should we consider having a electric cooking with induction cookers? Isn't this cheaper? Because then once you are already taken the task and goal of connecting every household, once that has been done, sending power would be a lot cheaper in many ways than trying to ship every month, as I said, cylinders to everyone. So I think this is a complex situation which should be examined in totality as a system, and we should then we can arrive at some conclusion. But clearly, I think there are huge gains to be made by having a common understanding and a common strategy for doing this. Gas demand can increase with the requirement of balancing renewable powers, which are intermittent and so on. And I think we have significant opportunities in the Southeast Asia, certainly, and perhaps if we extend the larger Indo-Pacific region, the opportunities would be even more viable and available. Now, with this observation, may I ask if anyone wants to have any comment further on?
If you permit me, sir. So I think very good points. In our journey towards the energy transition, I think what we are hearing is there is going to be deepening of electrification. So if electrification is the way to go, then the question would be that do you really need to have a parallel gas infrastructure duplicating the electricity infrastructure? And that's something for whoever is the policymakers to consider, because these are going to be expensive investments, and likelihood of something getting sort of remaining unused is a big risk. But we have to also remember that while there are uses which lend themselves easier to electrification, and you talked about household cooking, for example, but there are going to be industrial processes that are hard to abate, and to address them, you would have to get, I think, gas in to get them out of coal burning or something.
Yes, certainly. I think there are many industrial processes where the high temperature that gas can provide becomes very critical. And of course, this, when one talks, one would like to use the most suitable source of energy. Gas would have a huge role to play in any case. I mean, you know, the ceramic industry would require that, and so on and so forth. Mr. Taro, you would like to say something?
Yeah, probably since I may be the only one who's not from South Asia, I'll throw in some different angle being Japanese. In Japan, as I said, we've been importing LNG since 1969, and you may think that every single person in Japan has access to the regasified LNG, but actually no. Still, on the household basis, close to 50% is using LPG for city gas usage. So LNG mainly used for power plants, and also, yes, of course, for the city gas, but mainly in the city. And the suburban areas still depend on the cylindered LPG. So probably what we can think about is where we see the right balance, depending on the purpose of the usage of the gas. Yeah.
Thank you very much. No, I wanted to add that in another field, a huge cooperation has been initiated by Bangladesh. Bangladesh is currently importing 1,000 megawatts of electricity from India, and another 2,400 megawatts are under discussion. And connectivity in that field is happening. The NTPC is also building a 1,320 megawatt, though coal-fired power plant, but that's the beginning of cooperation that is coming along. In the field of LNG, I personally feel that in this entire East Coast, whether it is for industrial or power generation purpose, or it goes up to the city gate, or it goes up to the residences, is something to see. But certainly for generation of electricity, I personally feel very strongly that it should be happening, and it should be, perhaps the initiative should be taken by Bangladesh. And as Mr. Kirit has stated, that also utilizing the cold heat would enhance the generation capacity to an extent where the efficiency would outweigh or will be more useful in terms of capital expenditure. Thank you.
Well, I think there are some questions which we have received online, and let me raise the first question. Where might government to government and government to business interventions contributing to developing a regional gas infrastructure and market? So government to government and government to business activities to promote development of regional infrastructure for the gas market. Now, anyone wants to take on that question?
I have been involved in the formation of the private sector power generation policy of the government of Bangladesh, and now also remaining involved in the LNG import part. We ourselves utilize currently about 200 MMCFD of gas. But it is very difficult to think that without government support and without a sort of strong support from the government, such sensitive aspects as energy can be managed. In Bangladesh and India, the cooperation that has evolved is 100% through the government bodies, Bangladesh Power Development Board, and the authorities in India for exporting of electricity. So gas to business or government to business is something that we must aspire for. But first of all, I think all the governments should agree on a platform that they would be supporting each other. In the recent past, in another aspect where Summit has taken over 2 terminals in Kolkata and Patna, those were internationally tendered, and the government has provided strong support for inland waterways to be connected. Similar such platform has to be built in order for the private sector to enter.
I think the government to business in relationship is very critical in developing infrastructure of which really are expensive and have a long lifetime. For example, I mean, you cannot think of having a city gas grid without having a clear and policy of the government and some support given to the government to these gas grid operators, because they have to have some assured supply of gas. At the same time, they need to have finances and other things. So I think government to business, we have seen in all areas of energy infrastructure, has played a very important role. Now, government to government is also very critical. For example, if an Indian company is going to set a power plant to export power to Bangladesh, that cannot really happen unless they are assured that the governments have agreed that this trade of electricity will be permitted for a long period of time. So I think government to business is clearly important. Governments have to give assurance of a policy stability, that it will not really fluctuate, that once we have given you this kind of an assurance, we will stick by it. And government to government is critical because that also provides businesses and others to invest in it, because they would say that, yes, this policy is going to remain for some time, and then they can really go ahead. Anybody else wants to say anything?
Well, as Shell, we really don't have that much of experience in cross-border LNG investments. So I don't have any reference from the Shell context, but I have sort of in the recent past read news reports of India participating in a LNG terminal project, or Indian companies participating in an LNG terminal project in Sri Lanka, for example. So, countries which don't have sufficient demand to be able to sustain economic viability of an LNG terminal, even if it's an FSRU, then it is by combining the demands in nearby markets, we can actually make this work. So that's a splendid, I think, initiative if that happens. But there has also been another project which I will not name, but of an Indian promoter wanting to set up an LNG terminal, FSRU, in the state of West Bengal, and actually then taking up gas pipeline right into Bangladesh. So the other two instances that come to mind, but they're, I think, enormously difficult, and without sort of strong government support and trust, it becomes very difficult to deliver.
Mr. Taro, you might give us some examples of how so in Japan the energy government played role in this.
Yes, as I think all of you mentioned, starting to import LNG, you need a strong government support, because LNG especially requires huge investment upfront in the beginning, and the actual power demand, without the actual power demand commitment, investors cannot justify the investments. And of course, the private sectors, the private companies have stakeholders, they have shareholders, employees, and commitments to the external parties. And the business has to make sense as business. But for the emerging market entrance, there are cases where that consists some business risk that you don't face in the other countries, or already imported countries. And that's where government could come in to support. And that support specifically means the commitment of the offtake of the power, in case LNG is used for power. Probably that doesn't perfectly apply for India, but it should apply to Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. So that is for the government, and for the governmental financial sectors, there are roles that they can play, because likewise the private developers, private banks sometimes cannot take those risks. They have some certain limitations that they can do, and probably that's where exactly the governmental financial institutions can come in to support us.
Thank you very much. I think The observations here really lead to this next question which has been posed. Yeah, I will come to these questions from the floor a little later, but so I won't forget you, don't worry. Is there scope for India to take an initiative of forming a triad Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka in the LNG market? You already said India is trying to set up, participate in a LNG terminal with this. And I think that is what I started out saying, that there are large economies of scale in LNG terminal, and we can certainly set up jointly LNG terminal, and having pipelines within your own country, since you need it, it should be possible to do so. So I think clearly, if Bangladesh wants to join it, this Sri Lanka terminal can be made larger, or we can have another terminal on the east coast of either in Bangladesh or in India, with the idea of sharing LNG or gas, in a sense, between the countries. And these things require, again, a long-term government-to-government commitment and so on. Would you like to?
Just a quick point. I've been in the business of LNG terminal developments for many years. So the challenge for LNG terminal development is that you put in a large amount of capex, and you would like the utilization to be high very early. Otherwise, your economics get killed. So it's important, therefore, that instead of having too many LNG terminals, you have an LNG terminal and get it to maximum utilization before you go and invest in a new one. And to achieve that, if you have some sort of regional cooperation, you're more likely to have that, rather than that if you go for separate terminals, all of them will have very slow build-ups and affect economics. The other point I wanted to make is that when we are looking at usage sectors, we are looking at power, or sort of industrial use. But I think into the future, one might see an important demand sector in transportation. So heavy-duty transportation is likely to be, likely to use LNG, and countries have to be prepared for that. And there's enormous amount of learnings that South Asian countries can share to make it go fast. Equally, for example, if it's a LNG driven truck. Now, if you look at the market of India is good enough, but if you look at the market of South Asia, it will give more confidence to various players, whether it is the manufacturers, whether it is the fleet operators, to actually invest. And I would say in the case of Mr. Aziz Khan talked about the ports along the Bay of Bengal, and particular importance is the port of Colombo, which gets a lot of international shipping through. Now, with the maritime regulations kicking in from 2020, where you need to have low sulfur bunker fuels, so one sees LNG as a bunker fuel for long distance shipping. And so if that is the case, then how does Colombo port provide that bunkering fuel to ships that come in? So that they would desperately need sort of to offer LNG. And equally, we'll see all the ports in this along the full Bay of Bengal. They also would gradually need that as a bunkering. So unless you have cooperation around the coast, very difficult to deliver that to the shipping industry.
Now, the third question is directed to Mr. Aziz. How can Bangladesh create a symbolic relationship with India for the LNG market? How can Bangladesh create a symbolic relationship with India for an LNG market?
Well, Bangladesh and India, as I mentioned, is having a very cooperative partnership sort of relationship. We have partnered, if not in the LNG, the first power plants generating from gas in northeastern states of India were transported through Bangladesh, and Bangladesh allowed that, and then Bangladesh also, as I mentioned, is importing at this point in time 1,000 megawatts. In a similar way, since the natural gas is very natural in Bangladesh, we are currently generating 60% of our electricity from natural gas, which is, on the other hand, in India is probably about 20-25%. So we have a natural advantage in understanding natural gas, and by virtue of going into LNG before, I think it is very much possible that Bangladesh starts exporting RLNG into West Bengal, Bihar, Jharkhand areas, which would be very easy. The proximity from Bangladesh to these areas and the already existing grid of Bangladesh can support this very much.
Thank you. The next question is there a what barriers do we need to overcome to create a regional LNG market? Anybody, but please.
Thank you very much. As Mr. Parikh had mentioned, we require the governments of each of the countries to have political will as well as economic will to allow economies of scale as well as competitiveness to come into. The main context of free market should be allowed rather than a sense of security, I suppose, or a sense of confidence that it is in my own land. If economics and commerce can be regulated in a manner, laws can be made in a manner like the European Union, where Russia is the largest seller of natural gas, still they have not the best of relationships. A similar sort of relationship must develop between the countries, and a platform must be created enabling the businesses to export to each other, even energy, LNG, without any fear or without any concern.
Anybody else?
Well, quite frankly, I don't understand the concept of an LNG market for South Asia, as I mentioned before, because can you have a South Asian diesel market? Can you have a South Asian petrol market? You can't. So I think that I don't understand. But however, what I understand is it's possible to integrate grids. So if the Indian gas grid becomes large enough and is proximate enough to connect to the Bangladeshi grid, then there'll be benefits to both sides in the gas grids being able to flow gas in either direction and actually making the grid stronger and more resilient. Equally, you could see a grid integration happening at the electricity scale also. And I mean, I've been for many years, I've been wondering, so why can't we get this sorted? Because in the northeast of India, we have lots of hydro which we can't bring to the main central parts of the country. There is gas availability there. So you could actually produce a lot of electricity there and bring it down to Bangladesh. And then, you know, Bangladesh could export whatever is surplus on their side from the eastern borders. So there's a huge scope for integration in this part of the world, bringing in Bhutan, Nepal. So I think it's a great opportunity, and it'll be a shame if it is not achieved.
Yeah, to me it seems if you are talking about a gas market, one would think in terms of maybe a kind of an open access type of a market that anybody can buy gas from anybody. Now, if you are thinking of such a market, then the biggest bottleneck at the moment, biggest barrier to me, is the Indian government's gas pricing policies, which is completely mixed up and has been changing from one point to the other. And we have so many prices of gas, and we have not really have a uniformity about it. I think obviously we need to really liberalize the gas market within India first. If you are concerned that some people are making windfall gains because they were given fields on a nomination basis earlier and they're producing gas and selling at a price at which others who had bid the gas field and have got that are selling it, you could certainly impose a larger, they are anyway public sector firms, so larger share of their profits for the gas that they produce from the nominated field. So there are other ways of doing it rather than distorting the gas market. And I think if we can remove the distortions, certainly the Indian economy would benefit, and it would facilitate gas trade in the sense of open access kind of a business that can take place. I think other question is there a possibility of seamless and integrated LNG market sharing among South Asian countries? And I will read the next one also. Are there any more? As energy demand in South Asia continues to grow, what role can be played by broader connectivity initiatives, linkage with South Asia through BIMSTEC? So I think as far as the possibility of seamless and integrated market is concerned, we are already moving towards a seamless and integrated energy market electricity market. And I think logically we should go for other kinds of energy sources as well. And I believe that gas market is the next one. But before that, the Indian government needs to put its own act into order. And as far as the last question is concerned, what is the broader connectivity linkage with Southeast Asia through BIMSTEC? I think BIMSTEC really offers a huge new set of opportunities, as I said, because the resources are different, the demand structure would be different, and obviously, in such a case, having a market which is integrated can benefit everyone. But anybody else would like to make a comment on this? Okay.
When we are talking about creation of the market, as you have rightly pointed out, the discovery of pricing is very important, and not only in India, in Bangladesh as well, for natural gas, as well as for internationally. The LNG is priced with oil plus something, or with Henry Hub. So a overall global price discovery method, as well as a price discovery method for each of these countries, must come up in order to have a clarity of the market. A market would function when the pricing is understandable by everybody. On another aspect that I missed out, and the question was there are huge potentials of hydroelectricity in Arunachal of India, and Bangladesh falls in between the hinterland of India and Arunachal, as well as there is existing relationship with Bhutan and India. So this entire electricity grid, if connected, would support each and every country over here.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, the organizers asked me to deal with the online questions first. I'm sure it must be as frustrating as when you go to a counter somewhere and asking a question, and there is a phone comes and she keeps on answering the fellow at the phone and makes you wait. You feel you should not have come here. And I'm sorry that you had felt like this, but you should blame the organizers for instructing me to do so. So now you're open to questions from the audience, please.
I don't think you should penalize those of us who are extroverted and don't like texting.
Can you use a mic, please? Somebody to give them a mic?
This mic.
Here, there is a mic.
Thanks. Yeah, I was saying you shouldn't penalize those of us who are extroverted and actually like talking to people instead of texting. So I'm Bill Pegues from the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which is the U.S. Development Bank. And Mr. Chaudhary, I appreciate what you said up front about the primacy of hydrocarbons. We spent and have spent a lot of time in the past several years in the developing markets we work in, financing a lot of renewable projects, wind and solar and hydro. And those are very important, but if you look at the broader scope of energy, obviously there is nothing that can displace dense hydrocarbons. And from a decarbonization perspective, obviously natural gas is very important. One data point that I always try to bring up as a former engineer and somebody who for many years financed oil and gas projects and now power projects is that because of the utilization rate for solar and wind power plants, which is for solar, you're lucky if you're getting 20%, for wind on average low to mid-30s, that basically for every 10 megawatts of renewable wind and solar you put in, you're really getting only 3 megawatts of base load. You need to put in 7 megawatts of gas generation to firm that power and make it dispatchable. And so when you're having a conversation about renewables, you cannot leave natural gas out of the equation. So that's my comment. My question to the panel is, when we're very interested in financing energy projects in South Asia, I work specifically on coordinator and portfolios in South Asia. I'd like it if you could talk about what is getting in the way of bankable projects in natural gas, either the landing of LNG or the financing of infrastructure and of power plants. Particularly in India and Sri Lanka. Bangladesh has been for a long time, I think, ahead of the curve in terms of using natural gas and power generation. But there are obviously, as you alluded to, pricing barriers, infrastructure barriers, and just the fact that not much natural gas is even used in India. And so I'm interested in your insights in India and in Sri Lanka. What needs to happen at a government level and in the market for natural gas to be able to be deployed, not only for power generation, but in city gas applications, getting LPG to agricultural areas, rural areas, and in power generation? Thanks.
One thing that comes to my mind straight away is that the government of India is trying to have city gas grids in some 300 cities. At the moment, so there is a huge scope for financing infrastructure for city gas grids in very many smaller cities and towns. Anybody else?
Well, you could be sitting for a long time if I get started on this. I mean, if you see the history of the gas sector in India, so it was essentially domestic gas being directed to certain priority sectors like power and fertilizer to meet the socio-political needs of the government to give cheap or free electricity to farmers and urea to farmers. So it is on that basis that gas development has progressed in the country, and the pipelines connect up to power plants and fertilizer plants. And the power plants don't use that much of gas nowadays. And the mindset has always been, therefore, to keep the gas prices low, and that sort of stymied the development of the upstream sector. So when, in our experience, when we brought LNG into the country in 2006, on a market basis, we didn't have a contractual arrangement. We just brought spot LNG at that point in time. And what we found strange was that so the customers were not willing to buy gas at regasified LNG at $6 per MMBTU, but they were willing to burn naphtha, which was what, 3 or 4 times that. So you have these sort of inconsistencies, which has got ironed out over time. I think the essential problem is that if you want to target LNG into the power sector, because of the presence of the coal projects, which have their particular price line and the merit order of operations, gas doesn't get dispatched. So anything above $5 per MMBTU, gas does not get dispatched. So and you may have occasional demand surges when they bring in some gas, but it does not sustain even an intermediate load operation. And so clearly gas, if gas has to progress, it has to look at new markets. I'll give you the example. We are trying to develop a project on the East Coast, in Kakinada, for example. And there is this industrial city of Visakhapatnam, which is about 130, 40 kilometers away. And that has a lot of demand for gas. But all the gas flows past the city into the mainland, into the power plants and fertilizer plants. But what would normally be a fantastic, a paradise for a gas marketer, that market does not get gas. So until we get to some rational basis of developing gas markets to reach the customers who can actually afford gas, we're going to have this sort of difficult development of the gas sector.
That's what I said earlier, that the Indian government should need to put its gas pricing policy on a sensible basis. Way back in 2006 in the integrated energy policy that I chaired, we had recommended that gas market should be free and market determined, and that if you want to subsidize fertilizer plants, don't subsidize them through gas pricing, but subsidize more directly. But unfortunately, not all expert committee recommendations are implemented. Okay. There is, you had a question.
Sorry to
please,
interrupt. Maybe I want to add an answer to your question. So about the financing, I will not touch upon the specific example, but typical case is that when countries start importing LNG, probably that is for power. And unlike countries like Bangladesh or Pakistan, where the country is already based on the gas economy, they have gas pipelines and gas power plants, but other countries may be using some fuel oil or coal in the power plants. So when implementing LNG import, not all demand will be fulfilled for the regasification terminal. So probably likelihood is the small power plant starts up from the conversion from the oil, because that is the most expensive fuel. And then there's some new gas power plants added to that capacity in years. So that means the economics of the regasification terminal is not justified in the early years. And also the PPA, the power purchase agreement, is not 100% and may not be guaranteed by the government and may not be paid in US dollars, but local currency. And subsequently, the LNG supply to fulfill this demand has to come in pieces. Probably early years, very small volume, and a lot of flexibilities. Probably some countries would require shorter term because they don't know how the progress will be. So those are all the challenges that would come back to the financiers. So the answer to your question is that it's very unstable financial model that we have to face, and the key to this solution is, again, the strong commitment from the government. They have to commit that they will import LNG. They can't stop. So that is my answer to your question.
Please.
Thank you. My name is Sanjay Mangla and I work for Cuts International, the organizers one. So I want to make 2 points. One is that I think it's time now that we should declare the availability of clean energy as a fundamental right. In the time of this, carbonization of the environment and all this, so it's not only energy, but it should be the clean energy, at least, which enable people to breathe in a clean environment so as to have sustainable, good living life. So that is my one humble submission, that I think we should work to declare it as a fundamental right. Number 2, as far as the cross-border trade of energy, so we have just discussed that government-to-government approach is very, very important. And government dialogues take place at various levels, but I think here that the role of regional groupings or regional trade agreements, which are now the sectoral based. We have just taken an example of BIMSTEC. So BIMSTEC is a sectoral based, cooperation based, form of trade agreement or, regional grouping. So I think the sectoral, and similarly the BRICS is also one. So in these sectoral based regional groupings where we have a lot of sectors and energy is one, so I think the dialogues at all the levels should take place at a regular level and their progress should be monitored so that the timely decisions can be taken, because gas and energy is so big sector which requires a lot of infrastructure investment and a huge investment and so many other issues. So I think the role of regional trade agreements is very, very important and their progress should be timely monitored. Thank you.
Well, a rights-based approach is the darling of many NGOs in India. But what does it accomplish? I mean, you can say, yes, I have the right to food, which is in the UN Charter. That's been there for, God knows, 70 years. We still have lots of hungry people in the world. So declaring it as a right, does it really help, is the question I would like to ask you in response to your question. I think certainly having a target that, yes, I do want to have no hungry person in the country by the year 2025, I can understand that makes a lot more sense to me than say everybody has a right to food all time and so on. So I think I agree with the sentiments of having that everyone should have a right to food, but declaring it as a right doesn't necessarily provide the food to them. The second question, I think you said, second observation yours is that, look, dialogue should take place at many places, and I think that's extremely valuable and correct. But it would be really worthwhile if the governments, to begin with, really come to a conclusion and say, yes, we want eventually to have an integrated gas grid and a gas market in this region, and that our target date is maybe 2025 or something. Then I think all these other dialogues can be more focused and fruitful. But certainly, it's a worthwhile idea to have dialogues at all levels.
Yeah, that is great. I mean, I'm also quite sort of encouraged by your sentiment, but equally, number of white hairs on my head will suggest that, we need to approach it slightly differently, perhaps. So I think it's a very good point that everybody needs to have clean energy, but then you have to ask the question why? Why does everybody need to have clean energy? And then you start doing some cost-benefit analysis of the cost of not having clean energy. So in Delhi, the cost of public health is privatized. So you and I go and buy our inhalers and our air purifiers, and the cost is not being reflected. The cost is there to the economy, but it's not being appropriately reflected. So if somebody does actually that piece of work, that what is the cost to public health, and then it starts becoming that's what I said earlier in my comments, that once you cost in externalities, then you'll find that the cleaner fuels actually are better than the not so cleaner fuels. But that piece of work, I think, either is not done or it's so complex that the policymakers don't understand it.
It's increasing GDP because so many air purifiers are being sold. Would you like to have any comments? Okay, any other question? Yes, please. We have 3. Start with this. Okay.
Sure. So thank you again from the U.S. Embassy in Colombo. And my question is, as the U.S. becomes one of the largest exporters of LNG, there's going to be... Sorry, as the United States becomes one of the largest exporters of LNG, I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the world LNG markets. On the other hand, I think when you talk to folks in South Asia, there are concerns about costs and transport of LNG. So how can U.S. LNG play a role in developing LNG markets here in South Asia?
If I understood your question, is that how could U.S. LNG exports and other things can help other countries? In South Asia, right. Yeah, I think it's really, in a sense, the answer is very straightforward. U.S. exports this market, the global supply of LNG or gas increases, the prices come down, and our import cost from Middle East or wherever we are getting it goes down and helps us. But I think Mr. Shell can give you a better answer.
No, I think it's when I started my career 20 years ago, U.S. was not in the LNG markets at all. It sort of stayed alone. It's great to see over the years what has happened and to emerge as one of the largest LNG suppliers. And I think what the entry of the U.S. supply has made in the market is, there's been a long-standing discomfort, for example, in pricing LNG to oil price, and the way U.S. LNG is sort of priced from what we have from the information we have in the public domain. It is quite different. So it gives an option to customers to look at a different pricing model. Whether it works or not is a different... you have to understand that originally, I think when LNG was introduced into this, what you're calling Indo-Pacific region, was essentially to replace liquid fuels, and therefore the pricing was linked to liquid fuels or crude more generally. But as people look at non-liquid fuel applications, and that connection perhaps becomes less understandable, and therefore an alternative model may look attractive. And also depends upon what the crude prices are. If the crude prices are high, U.S. LNG looks very attractive, and when crude prices drop, then again people sort of lose interest. So we're going to see that happen quite a bit of time. But it's always good to have another source of supply. It increases diversity and security of supply. and a little bit more transparency in the way these markets operate.
Yeah, if I may add, the supply from U.S. LNG, yes, it is quite far from South Asia. It's actually exactly the opposite side of the Earth. But it doesn't have to directly come to South Asia. There are markets in Atlantic, such as South America and Europe, where the Middle Eastern LNG is supplied now. But LNG coming from US could fulfill these Atlantic demand, which eventually pushes out the supply from Middle East to South Asia, or even if you look at Malaysia, it's quite close from, for example, Bangladesh, and those supplies can indirectly come to or those supplies could come to South Asia, which, in a way, saying that the U.S. LNG reach into the region indirectly.
Okay, there is a question in the middle, right? Who has the mic goes first?
I'm Sugisar Senadir from Sri Lanka. I understand that Sri Lanka is about to award a tender for gas pipeline and a gas-fired plant. It is to be given to an Indo-Japanese consortium comprising of Petronet LNG of India and Mitsubishi and Zoids of Japan. It is to be, if it works out, early next year, it will commence implementation of that project.
Did you understand the question? Please. Is there a question or a comment? We are
Because you are asking
comment.
that's a comment only because clarification. It has not been awarded, it's yet to be finalized.
Yeah. Okay. Ladies first, come please.
Thank you. I'm Garima from Kutz Institute for Regulation and Competition. Recently, the government has expressed interest in setting up a gas trading hub in India. So do you think that we'd be able to successfully set up one like US and Europe, a well-functioning one? And for that, it's important to move to market-driven prices first. So do you see liberalization of prices first? How soon do you see it coming?
Who should answer this question?
Whoever is in the best position to.
Yeah, I think.
I will take it up because I am farthest from it. And I'm not an Indian, so the challenge of a market is really price discovery. And both in India and Bangladesh, as Mr. Parikh had mentioned, that Indian gas prices are quite convoluted, different prices for different regions, sectors, persons. So it is also for Bangladesh. So under these circumstances, I do not see a market evolving until unless market is demand and supply driven. So regulations have to come in first in order to understand how this international pricing, because we are both importing LNG, whether it is India, Bangladesh, or Sri Lanka. We are importing LNG that is market related either through the Middle East or through the Henry Hub of the United States. But as it comes to Bangladesh or to India, it has to be utilized by industries, by power generation, and so on and so forth. And then at what price electricity is purchased by the government is, and finally to the residences, this entire value chain would have to be removed from all aspects of government intervention and allows market to intervene it. To do that, we require huge social change. We have to become much more wealthier. There is people, somebody was mentioning that in Delhi, you require air purifiers. Now, those costs are also there, but to bring it out and the socio-political demand of the poverty, the socio-political demand of elections, of winning elections, those all has to come in before a market can come into this space. That's my outside thought.
Let me try and address that without getting into any controversy. So what I would only suggest is that since you are young students, so why don't you look at the features of those very successful markets in Europe and US and see what is missing in India.
Yeah, actually, I was at ICF before this, and I got into studying that.
Yeah,
but
so-
I wanted to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, so normally for a market trading platform to operate, one would look at a certain maturity of infrastructure, allowing players to freely be able to perform in the market, and number of players in the market, suppliers and buyers, and some depth in the market. So we are clearly not there yet. So, but does that mean that we don't start? I mean, that's a debatable question. So maybe you start and then you find your way as you go along, because at least it brings in some amount of transparency, some amount of price discovery.
Yeah, I think also it may seem very pessimistic to say that we first need to have competitive pricing in India and Bangladesh or India and other countries before we can have trade.
Yeah, it's like more of a chicken and egg problem then.
Yeah, but I mean, look at our trade of electricity. Even though the electricity pricing is, you could say, muddled or confused or not consistent in some sense, we still have people who want to set up a power plant in India with or Nepal, and a power purchase agreement is made with somebody else. So that at least business to business kind of a trade can begin the whole process. And that would be one way maybe to move towards this.
Yeah, for the hub, I think Mr. Chaudhary has mentioned infrastructure is quite important. There are hubs, gas hubs, such as Henry Hub in US or NBP in Europe or TTF in Dutch. Where they have massive amount of pipelines. Yeah. For example, all the pipelines on Earth, 75% of all the pipelines network on Earth is in US, one country. Very, very highly commoditized liquid market. So that makes a hub because the price is transparent. So in order for one country to have a hub, you need to have, of course, competitive price, but also transparent price. You need to have a market where you can either absorb the gas whenever people bring the gas to that country, or sell the gas at the hub price every time people want to buy. So that makes the hub. So in short, I think you need an infrastructure to become a transparent hub.
There is still one question there. Yes, please.
Okay, thanks. I'm the last one. My name is Gagandeep Dham. I represent Tata Consulting Engineers, and we are one of the engineering wing of Tata Group. In fact, a lot have been talked about the policies, the import-export of LNG, investments, supply, technologies. I don't know whether I have missed, but I was in the other session, which is on power, so I was just shuffling myself. But I think it's very important. We should also talk about the, the kind of engineering and the technology services that are required for building up an LNG or a power project in terms of a sustainable project for another 10 years, 20 years down the line. And specifically in countries, India has really picked up momentum, but specifically in Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, a focus has to be done where there's a proper selection of technology suppliers, right stakeholders, right engineering consultants. What my experience is that there is a single mindset in these countries. There is no diverse process. I mean, with the governments, it's really tough. But I think you, as private players, Shell being here, Mr. Aziz being here from Summit Group, The other big companies in Bangladesh like Unique, Alam, who are trying to pitch in, power projects. They should be focusing on the right selection of the consultants as well. Where, this gentleman talked about decarbonization and clean energy. If you get the right technology, you get the right SOx, NOx emissions control, you get the right zero discharges. Whatever it is, the design and the concept of the plant is the heart of all these things that we have been discussing. So I think we should also focus on these areas, and probably you as private players could give a chance. When I talked about services in countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, being a Tata Group, we are always focused, what are the investments we can bring? We know there's a financial crunch, but if the technology is right, the advice is right, the payback periods are right, the ROs are right, I think we can solve these problems with the right and consultants around. That is one point. And I think we all need to, understand that this market is very niche, and it needs to be developed. If at this stage, the right decision is taken, we can minimize errors in long term. And this will really help. This is what I wanted to understand from you guys. In fact, Shell has given, a chance for all the petrol stations for India to Tata Consulting Engineers for the first time. And we have a lot of issues when we're trying to bring any US or a UK or a European consultant to pitch in for all these projects because of many issues. We have a very strong consultant for LNG in UK who has already burnt his fingers, and we're trying a lot to convince them. So we really need to educate the US, European and UK companies that things are changing, things are moving in the right head. And as we private players, I think we can take an edge on that. So this is what my suggestion is.
I wish there was a single mindset. I thought the mindset changes with every minister and every bureaucrat, so that you don't have a consistency about what's happening. But certainly, I think one agrees that we should really have the right kind of technology. But how do we ensure that? I don't think any bureaucrat or anyone can select what is the best technology. We really need to leave it to the person or the institution or the business enterprise which is taking the risk. They should decide what is the most appropriate technology for them. And for that, I believe that wherever we have had that kind of competitive setup, things have worked out well. But otherwise, we are debating whether Rafale is the right choice or not, and that will continue forever. Any other comment? Anybody?
He mentioned Shell a few times. So, we are in the business of these massive projects. We have our own very trusted partners that we work with. And, the oil and gas industry takes safety and the health safety, etc., very seriously. So we work to ensure that those aspects are sort of given right primacy and in our choice of partners. So we do that.
Yeah, which Shell I can certainly vouch on. That's why I said, it was a very great step, this which was taken for Indian market by Shell.
You had raised your hand, yes? That's the last question.
Luna Shamshidar from Bangladesh. I'm an IT entrepreneur, not in this trade at all. But it seems like a daunting task. Challenges have been taken by India and Bangladesh, and probably in the region, Sri Lanka a bit, as I understand. Can we promote LNG diplomacy to resolve this?
Let me take it up. We know each other. LNG as a part of diplomacy, it's being played by the United States, Middle East, and Russia to some extent. And I suppose Japan is playing them, or we can be part of the game or part of the diplomacy. But to have the courage of starting diplomacy on the LNG would be a daunting task, at the least for Bangladesh. For India, it is in a much better situation. It's a very large country with the largest democracy with 1 billion people. So they may take it up on the force of their number of people strength rather than the per capita income strength. Thank you.
Without getting into too much details, LNG is a full diplomacy play.
Since we have 5 minutes, I will ask one last question. And that would be, if battery technology is developed and the costs come down dramatically, what need would there be of gas as a balancing fuel? Since you have been making scenarios, maybe you can answer that.
So, what we have to recognize is that the battery does not generate electricity. So if you have to, put a unit of electricity into the battery and take it out, there is a cost to that. And also there is a cost to producing that unit of electricity. And of course, you could argue that there'll be so much of solar that that it'll be virtually zero marginal cost electricity going into that. So in that perfect world, yeah, perhaps we don't need it. But I think it's going to take a while for us to get to that perfect world. And to bear in mind, without wanting to sound too pessimistic in otherwise, which is a very sunny topic, we have not discussed so much about the disposal of these solar panels or reprocessing of batteries going into the future. And one has to actually, when somebody talks about nuclear plants, I've been told that we awfully don't consider the decommissioning, abandonment costs of nuclear plants. Similarly, when we talk about renewables, I think we have to also talk about the abandonment costs of I mean, the other day I was at a seminar where somebody pointed out that the solar glass that is used to allow a better passage of sun rays, they use something like a metal called antimony. And this antimony actually leaches and is worse than arsenic poisoning, this gentleman argued. So, there are various elements to this story that you have to make sure that we count in before we discount one for the other.
Okay, with that very wise conclusion, I conclude this session. Thank you all.
Much to all the panelists and the moderator. May I please now request Mr. Parikh to present the panelists with a Grow Tree certificate. And this is for Mr. Parikh for honoring us with moderating the session. Thank you. Please. This brings us to the last session in this room. Please gather in the Shah Jahan room for the concluding session. Tea and coffee is in Shah Jahan room. You can take that. And
can we promote LNG diplomacy to resolve this?
Let me take it up. I mean, we know each other. LNG as a part of diplomacy, it's being played by the United States, Middle East, and Russia to some extent. And I suppose Japan is playing them, or we can be part of the game or part of the diplomacy. But to have the courage of starting diplomacy on the LNG would be a daunting task, at the least for Bangladesh. For India, it is in a much better situation. It's a very large country with the largest democracy with 1 billion people. So they may take it up on the force of their number of people strength rather than the per capita income strength. Thank you.
Without getting into too much details, LNG is a full diplomacy play.
Since we have 5 minutes, I will ask one last question. And that would be, if battery technology is developed and the costs come down dramatically, what need would there be of gas as a balancing fuel? Since you have been making scenarios, maybe you can answer that.
So, what we have to recognize is that the battery does not generate electricity. So if you have to, put a unit of electricity into the battery and take it out, there is a cost to that. And also there is a cost to producing that unit of electricity. And of course, you could argue that there'll be so much of solar that that it'll be virtually zero marginal cost electricity going into that. So in that perfect world, yeah, perhaps we don't need it. But I think it's going to take a while for us to get to that perfect world. And to bear in mind, without wanting to sound too pessimistic in otherwise, which is a very sunny topic, we have not discussed so much about the disposal of these solar panels or reprocessing of batteries going into the future. And one has to actually, when somebody talks about nuclear plants, I've been told that we awfully don't consider the decommissioning, abandonment costs of nuclear plants. Similarly, when we talk about renewables, I think we have to also talk about the abandonment costs of I mean, the other day I was at a seminar where somebody pointed out that the solar glass that is used to allow a better passage of sun rays, they use something like a metal called antimony. And this antimony actually leaches and is worse than arsenic poisoning, this gentleman argued. So, there are various elements to this story that you have to make sure that we count in before we discount one for the other.
Okay, with that very wise conclusion, I conclude this session. Thank you all.
Much to all the panelists and the moderator. May I please now request Mr. Parikh to present the panelists with a Grow Tree certificate. And this is for Mr. Parikh for honoring us with moderating the session. Thank you. Please. This brings us to the last session in this room. Please gather in the Shah Jahan room for the concluding session. Tea and coffee is in Shah Jahan room. You can take that and